and welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. This is our Friday morning episode, and my name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media. We've had a little bit of a break, so it's good to be back. Today, we're focusing on ISACA's annual research report, The State of Cybersecurity, and I'm joined by two US guests, both on the east and west coast of the US. Jenai Marinkovic, who is a virtual CTO CISO, and he's with the ISACA Emerging Trends Working Group, and John Brandt, who is the lead of this particular report, second year in a row for John. We're going to dive into the findings, and this is, I think, the 7th or the 8th report, annual report in this particular field. So it's been really good, and thanks to Karen, who works with ISACA, for organising this particular session. John and Jenai, thanks for joining us.
Howdy, nice to be here.
Thanks, Chris.
Beautiful. Look, let's dive into the report. I've got one slide here for the report. We won't sort of take the audience through step by step, but we're going to dive into what that report is, and I'll just blow that up a little bit so we can see. But effectively, this is a global update on workforce efforts, resources and budgets. We can see here for cybersecurity staffing, the somewhat understaffed and significantly understaffed is leading out in front. Appropriately staffed about 35%, which isn't too bad. And then down here, figure 4, unfilled positions. Does the organisation have unfilled open cybersecurity positions? And that's a yes at over half. So very interesting in terms of, I would suggest that this is also consistent to what we've been seeing here in Australia and probably what else you've seen in the world. John, you were the practice lead for, and I don't have your title in front of me, give me 1 second. Your title with ISACA is, I missed it, because you've got enough qualifications, mate. You've got every ISACA qualification there is. You are the, no, I don't have it in front of me. Maybe introduce your role with ISACA and then how this report was put together.
Sure thing. So my role is Information Security Professional Practices Lead. So in this role, I work in the information security portfolio within the content development side. So fourth quarter of 2020, we sent out a global survey out to anyone with a security title or CISM and CSXP certifications through ISACA. We had a 44% increase in respondents this year, which was absolutely wonderful, and added, and with some of the data that remained similar, just adds a lot of validation to what's going out there.
Yeah, and I think in the report, about 93% were ISACA members, and off the top of my head, ISACA's got, 250,000 members or thereabouts, and I'm an ISACA member, so a bit of a disclosure there as well. And Jenai, your role in the report as well?
Sure. Absolutely. My name is, for everybody, Jenai Marinkovic, and I'm the Virtual Chief Information Security and Chief Technology Officer for a company called Tiro Security. I'm a member of the ISACA Emerging Trends Working Group, so I help study and analyze emerging technology and workforce trends. I'm also the founder of an apprenticeship program called the Next CISO program, which is designed to train people with no experience in technology into entry-level GRC positions. So a lot of what I'll have to say is colored by the fact of having to train junior people into some of these roles.
Yep. Well, maybe John, the initial findings, because then we've got two options. One to start on the methodology, but we've kind of touched on that in terms of this is the industry sort of feeding back on some key areas. What were some of the key findings out of this that might have been slightly different from others? It says much the same as we've just pointed out in terms of what the findings were for underfilled and open positions.
So in full disclosure, right, when we wrote the report, one of the things we wanted to caution readers about is that this past year has been anything but normal. Right. So, and we preface this in a lot of areas, and just to exert some caution when we're interpreting results. Largely speaking, nothing has changed, at the end of the day. And that's really, so when we were putting the report together, we when you're reporting the same story year after year, you start to, kind of rack your brain what's going on. And ultimately what drove us taking a little different approach with this year's report and pulling in industry to the European and the U.S. government perspective, as well as just one apprenticeship body. And I'm thrilled that, my interviewee here, he runs one as well and can add some value there. Because I think at the end of the day, we just need to maximize the ways somebody could get into the workforce.
Yep. And how attractive is it? It can't be that cybersecurity is not attractive or IT isn't attractive. Is it just because of the general explosion of IT, the digitalization, the migration that everyone's taken to the cloud, that the workforce just hasn't been prepared long enough ago? Where do you think this kind of started, and maybe the link to where we are now? And maybe, Jenai, you do that mentoring as well and development. Is it just a lack of interest, or just a lack of people? The numbers just don't match where the industry is and what the industry requirements are.
Sure. So it's certainly not lack of interest. There are, hundreds of thousands of people who are interested in getting into cybersecurity. There's tension that's going on, and we see that in the report that says that, hey, one of the most important skills, things that we need for people coming on board is hands-on experience. And so people who are junior and have no exposure, to the industry are having difficulty trying to find jobs because you need to have this level of experience. The problem is a couple of things, because it's easy to say, well, managers, why don't you just mentor more? Why don't you open more jobs for junior people? But you've got a couple of problems there. First, managers and leaders are oversubscribed, so they don't have enough time, allocated to be able to train and up-level people. The second is that it takes roughly 6 to 8 months to get somebody fit for purpose from coming from a junior position to taking workload off of leaders. So by bringing junior people on, actually it's more work for people who are already overworked. And so we traditionally have been able to try and rely on universities and job training programs and so forth to get people ready and up to speed, boot camps, certifications, and so forth, but it's simply not enough. You need to have hands-on experience doing client work, working for a company, in order to be able to get some of these positions.
And is it also because, and I open it up to both of you, is it because the technology is also changing on an ongoing basis too? You kind of, the principles are the same, but the technology and applying the principles also changes. There's an upskill. It's kind of why I like doing what I do with the media. We're playing with the websites, because the tech is always changing. There's always upgrades. There's always, the patches to apply, but then there's different platforms coming out. And cloud computing has been another big one, where it's gone from on-prem, now we're in cloud environments. But the perimeter disappeared probably 10 years ago, and now we're into mobile computing and edge devices and the like. Is it technology related as well that's changed in terms of that skill set required?
So yes, in that technology is ultimately a trigger. So as an example, so with the explosion of cloud and connectivity, what you end up with is larger, more complex distributed third-party supplier networks, as an example. So it's not just the network that I'm controlling, it's all of the third parties with whom I partner. And that work is very difficult to try and automate or leverage technology to be able to analyze. You need boots to the ground to be able to do that. Absolutely, the transition, the explosion into movements like artificial intelligence and sensors and so forth, require us to up-level our skills. But if you look at the job descriptions of what's out there today, they're the same job descriptions that were out there 5 years ago. So the base skills of understanding cybersecurity and GRC are very similar. It's just a matter of getting people up-leveled and trained into those areas.
Okay, and maybe, John, the pipeline challenges is something that the report touches on, because again, pipeline's critical, and then if you can align that to, say, that technology pipeline as well, then you can start to align it. I think even from a, say, an enterprise perspective, you might look at your own technology strategy and then align the skill sets that you're going to need moving forward, and cybersecurity is always going to be there. And just before you touch on that, if anyone listening, if you've got a question, you can say good day wherever you're listening from the world. But if you've got a particular question here or comment, you're very welcome to contribute to the discussion. But yeah, John, maybe talk us through the pipeline challenges that the report highlights.
So I think we just want to level set too, and Jenai brought up some really good points here. And I think one of the struggles within the cyber industry at large is that there's just so many different types of work, right? And within the ISACA report, right, when we survey functional areas, there's individual technical, individual non-technical, your manager, and so on. So when we talk about pipeline challenges and specifically technical practitioners, you know, I was in that National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education held a workshop this week, 2-day workshop. And one of the things that was coming up from the educators, and this is academics admitting it, that they focused on theory. So it speaks to Jenai's point that if you're only focused on theory and there's no real practical application, because employers want somebody who can do the job. And then, so there's ways to go about that, but there's some concern, and we touch on it in the report, is, you know, the U.S. has largely kind of been ahead in trying to corral this with their with their cybersecurity framework, right? The European market is coming behind. They admitted that they were lagging. They're doing some very good work. What's going to be interesting at the end of the day, though, is how close or how different they are, right? And then which way other markets levitate towards, because we want to try to add some to normalize the workforce, so to speak. And I think that oftentimes we're too wrapped around the axle as to what are the required skills rather than the preferred skills. And to Jenai, right, because and oftentimes, Jenai touched on it, right, job descriptions haven't changed. When we can't talk about pipeline challenges without talking about the fact that although respondents largely are indifferent on university degrees, that the majority of companies are still requiring them. So you're unnecessarily basically slowing the pipe down and discarding in today's HRM system. Those applications are never even getting up to the recruiter or the HR or the hiring manager.
Something that we've seen here in Australia is, and then you're right, in terms of the universities are theory focused, whereas cybersecurity is more a sort of application. I mean, it still has theory behind it. It's not to be disregarded, but as you say, the industry needs people straight away. You can't go into a 3 to 4 year degree. By the time you come out, the technology's already changed as well. But we are seeing in Australia, we do acknowledge the NIST framework, but also we're seeing like SOCs being built in the university campus, and the students are applying. You know, there's one over in Perth, Edith Cowan University has a new SOC, a $3 million investment just launched last year, and applying the RSA sort of platform in there. And again, when those students come out, they understand a theory, but they can also go into a SOC and start to operate. Are you seeing that as part of what you're doing out of this report, where they align those skill sets to the education? What are your observations there, and does the report cover that type of thing? Or maybe, and rephrase that question of how much is the industry demanding those skills out of the universities and out of the education to go straight into a SOC or straight into that role and be operational?
So my understanding of this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jenai just for what she's seeing. But so yes, there is some demand there. I don't think it's substantial enough. And let's be honest, the size of the enterprise is going to determine which way they go. Your larger enterprises, they've got these robust training departments. They can do this and even outsource with guidance. So where there has been some of that tension, community colleges, your 2-year degree programs become pretty important here. What you mentioned, though, I actually had not heard, and I think that's a promising way forward. Here in the United States, and again, this is a global report, but speaking specifically of the United States, I really think that we put a lot of pressure and tell employers you need to change how you're hiring.
Yeah.
What has not been demanded yet is we're not changing how we're preparing individuals. And that's an unpopular message when universities are so important to the pipeline, because it will, I truly believe if we fundamentally need to alter how that happens, because 4 years is just too long. The construct that you just mentioned then kind of puts it almost in a trades type thing. You know, your electrician, your plumber, your HVAC, because then you're balancing the theory and the book stuff with the practical hands-on. And with that, you know, Jenai, obviously she's knee deep in that there, so I'll let her kind of take it from there.
I could not agree more. So the U.S. education system is very complex, right? Because you've got, as John mentioned, you've got your community colleges, you've got your continuing professional development, you've got your four-year universities, and so forth. And so what I've definitely seen at the college level is more programs around professional development, people who are looking to transition into cybersecurity and having like a one-year program to get people there. In terms of the four-year programs and even the community colleges, they still tend to rely a lot on internships, and you know, but not necessarily what you were mentioning, meaning building their own internal enterprise security capability that you would bring students in to ultimately run. So you'll see that sometimes, but not on the level that you're talking about. You know, so. Where I've seen the breakdown, though, is that you can, so let's say the SOC that you're talking about, which is good because I'm going to learn the tech. But one of the things that the report highlighted is this skills gap when it comes to human skills. And human skills, and we always say this, right? It's the human skills and so forth, and we never really break out what exactly that means. You know, so it's not just your presentation skills, although that's very critical. You know, you're not understanding how the business works. You're not understanding what a business process is. You're not understanding the corporate culture. You're not, you know, so there's so many things that go into, you don't know how to tell a story. And when you're dealing with the amount of data and that we deal with, and the complexity of the message that we're trying to get from C-suite all the way down to frontline workers, you know, being able to tell stories and being able to present are absolutely critical skills to every facet of cybersecurity. And so, you know, that's where one of the big areas that I actually was surprised about when we kicked off the apprenticeship program, because I thought, oh, I was going to struggle on the tech side in terms of getting people up to speed, and it wasn't tech. It was on the human side that we ended up seeing those gaps. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen any of the programs really dive in to helping to ultimately address that problem.
It's an interesting one. We did an interview with Alice White, again from Perth, but she's just got a new job with Atlassian here in Sydney. But she had a target, but she transitioned from safety and into security, and she was kind of right across that, and there's a lot of alignment there. You mentioned career transition. Is there any sort of careers that you find are aligning? Is there any trend in that come through that you go, oh, if we're going to recruit anybody, we're going to recruit from over there?
So, and I'm going to go away from the technical industries because I think those are, you know, pretty easy. Human resources people make amazing cybersecurity people, absolutely amazing. First off, they understand people. Second, they understand the business. But the third is they see things in the data that we miss. So I was working with a chief people officer who's transitioned to cybersecurity. She's one of my partners. And she was doing just a traditional identity and access management audit. And she saw cultural problems in looking at that data. I was looking at it as, well, you've got process problems and so forth. She saw cultural problems. And so, you know, human resources people, and they understand how to deal with high confidentiality data, you know, so they make really great cybersecurity people. A couple of other weird ones are healthcare, so nursing, as an example. And if you think about it, they understand immune systems. They understand how to deal with things holistically. They understand how to deal with high stress environments. They know how to communicate with people when they're under stress. Nurses I found have been pretty interesting in terms of transitioning. And then one more weird one I'll give you, and that is botanists and people who are in like landscape architecture. And it's the same thing. You're dealing with plants. And when you look at the environments that plants exist in, you're dealing with highly complex environments, viruses. So I was working with someone who transitioned to security from the landscape industry, and it was really interesting how quickly they caught on to certain things. But I'll end with that. When you start breaking cybersecurity down to its core, you'll actually find a lot of industries that there's natural transitions to.
Very good. I think the other one was the quantified skills gap, John. I'm specifically looking at Figure 12. What are the biggest skill gaps you've seen in cybersecurity professionals? And as Jenai just mentioned, the soft skills is way out in front at 56%, and then the security controls endpoint. Was there any particular industries covered off on this, or any other comments maybe from Jenai, if you've got that in terms of that career transition? And how important that is, and maybe even where the associations play a role in that. It's often a good entrance point for people who are looking to career transition. They might look at the sort of industry associations to go to as well. Anything specifically in this report about career transition?
Jonathan, did you want to take this one?
Sorry, John.
Sure. So largely speaking, what's happening is companies are hiring from within, pulling from other business units. So, and it speaks to some of what Jenai had already touched on a couple times. First of all, so those individuals are trusted persons. They're trusted employees. Yeah. They have already established, their street cred, if they will. They understand the business. They understand the priorities. They understand the culture. What we're starting to see time and time again, and I moderated a panel at RSA where Greg Tuhill spoke to this. We can teach tech to just about anybody who wants to learn.
Yeah.
So now it's okay. So how do we kind of take a step back here and start teasing out all of these other things that we know that your traditional pipeline suppliers have not been addressing? Oftentimes, and Jenai hit on all the presentation stuff. What's not necessarily covered in there, when it is a soft skill, largely you could call it either way, but analytical and critical thinking. And I think largely what's happening here is, even though a student may not get hands-on experience, if the programs would devise a program to help those individuals learn how to pull out the key nuggets of information, how to synthesize it, how to make judgments from it, that would go a long way. And that lends itself to why, like, people from the financial industry do very well when they come over. Legal, law enforcement, right? Because procedurally, they kind of get it.
Yeah. But don't you find that's what cybersecurity is about, though? It's one of those areas that you can come in from different angles and go, okay, I get that. I like the landscaping one where you look at it from a general environment. We talk in that language. I mentioned sort of the safety practitioner coming in because it's highly regulated. You're still dealing with people. You're dealing with behaviours, and it's that growing regulatory environment around cybersecurity as well that it's also changing, and hence you attract people from law and the like. And I think it's that one of those sort of conceptual domains. Where do you find, and again, same observations that I would say, is we're seeing people moving internally, but that's maybe, is that not a sort of an outcome of the lack of skills, because they can't look external, they have to go with the resources that they've got. And it's going to bring on the next sort of topic we're going to discuss, is on the funding as well. They may not have the resources or the funds to go outside. And if it's too hard to go outside, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But we are seeing a trend that they go inside first, and it might be with an audit, it might be with a review, or an ISO standard check and that type of thing. Is that the outcome? That's kind of the balance that we're seeing, is they go internal first because that, as this report says, there's a lack of external resources?
Well, I think largely it's the frustrated one, and whereas I can't speak to this is more of a hypothesis, but if you have somebody in your business that's coming from a non-technical career field, you could theoretically bring them in cheaper than what you would have to pay somebody that you're going out into the market paying fair market price right now.
Yeah.
So there's that business aspect of it you can't overlook.
And another one is, I mentioned the growing regulatory environment in cybersecurity. So it's forcing businesses, and also the threat landscape as well, it's forcing businesses to look at cybersecurity as a business problem. Hence, they're having to deal with it. Otherwise, they would just ignore it if it wasn't core business. The last sort of area, or key area, would be the cybersecurity funding. And the question here is, has cybersecurity funding reached an apex? John, maybe introduce us in terms of what this area was looking at to cover.
Sure. So this largely for our listeners refers to Figure 23 in the report. Yeah. And the tagline is that although funding budgets are still going up, they're not going up at the pace that they have been. So when you look at this over 6 years, there's a leveling that has happened, with the peak being back in 2018. So when we talk about skills and funding, something admittedly that was, I didn't consider with the question bank this year, and it will next year, is how training is funded differs by enterprise. And we can't overlook that right now, because depending on who's footing the bill is going to really drive some of their solutions. And I think that that's a logical next step, because since I've taken this report over, where we had opened, right, the sky is falling isn't helping anybody. We understand that the supply-demand curve is way out of whack. But so ISACA and others, our responsibility is to start adding some meaningful data to inform decision makers. How do we start to really make data-informed decisions moving there, instead of just throwing something at the wall and seeing if it works or not?
Yeah. Again, Jenai, your thoughts on that, particularly in your role as a virtual CTO, CISO. Mm-hmm. You can't, saying, "Oh, we need to spend more money," just doesn't cut it anymore.
Certainly not without the right business justification.
Okay, good.
And I want to delineate between training budgets, which have also kind of started to wane off, and I think part of the reason is that there's this perception that I can go to all of these online sites and be able to download training for $99.95, and that means that my people are trained. So you might end up seeing budgets kind of drop there, versus the budgets for running and operating your information security management system. And so I think a couple of things. I think first off, the whole fear, uncertainty, and doubt of people being terrified of the hacker, I think that's waning just a little bit now. And part of the reason is that companies have been able to survive massive breaches and come back. So companies feeling like they have to go out and spend a lot of money based on fear, that's starting to wane. And really the more focus is around compliance, either regulatory and statutory compliance, or compliance, and this is the big one, based on my customers and my clients. They're the ones that are actually driving a lot of these budgets. And executive leadership are far more savvy in the world of cybersecurity now, so they really want to see a good return on investment, for the dollars that they spend, especially given that technology changes so much. What they don't want to see is a whole, me removing, re-architecting, redesigning, redeploying my architecture every 18 months. They're not comfortable with that, so they expect you to run a pretty lean shop and be able to demonstrate that the money that I'm investing as an executive actually returns a relatively secure, defensible environment.
You touched on the training and the on-demand and how you can get down to $99. It has put a lot of sort of pressure on prices and the like. What about things like certifications and how certifications are viewed these days as well? I think there's always a mixed commentary on certifications and whether they're worthwhile, but I think it just demonstrates a dedication to ongoing learning. It doesn't necessarily say you know everything, but at least you're trying. Maybe, John, you've got more certifications there. Your CISM, CDP, CISO. I mean, maybe just talk us through even your mindset going through those of, what makes you go for so many certifications, and how do you think that the importance of certification? You can't, I'll tell you right now, you can't say certifications aren't important when you've got that many, but what's your thinking around that?
About just after I got hired at ISACA, there was a study that we had done, and it was about a 50-50 split, 51-49, I think, to be specific, as to whether enterprises loved or hated certifications. At the end of the day, the market is driving it. When, to Jenai's point, we have job descriptions out there that are called for ridiculous amounts of competencies in technologies and certifications. So it drives people that way. Absent of anything else out there, certifications exist as a attestation of somebody's abilities, right? Knowledge, skills, or abilities, depending on the type of certification. So the challenge is that, whereas the industry is driving that, the industry in enterprises at large are going to, you're going to live by the certification or die by the certification. So obviously some are in more favor than others. So from an employer standpoint, I think that they look at the more certifications you potentially have, the better, the more it's worth even interviewing you, right? Because there's a cost of bringing somebody on, or just, going through the HR process. For the applicant, what's really, from my perspective, it's concerning because administratively and financially, there's a burden to maintain all these certifications. Yeah, right. Some companies reimburse, so then it goes back to, what Jenai had talked about. There's a cost of doing business, and in a seller's market, I think companies are kind of almost have to do that, because the individual's like, well, if this is lucrative to you, then you're going to pay the bill, or I'll just let it lapse. Because I think at every stage of your career, you have to start determining which ones you're going to let sunset and lapse, because it's, based on what your aspirations are.
I think it's also time related. I did a bachelor's degree in security, so I resisted certifications for a long, long time. And then after a while, no one's, well, one, there was a couple of changes. One is the degree gets old, and two, it became less important. We talked about where universities were in the learning journey. They became a little bit less important or weren't as relevant. Jenai, maybe your comments on that, because we just touched on, say, the cheap on-demand training you can do. But even in the Microsoft Azure and the AWS training that you can do online, and get a Azure security kind of certificate, and most of it's free. Is a certification a good one to go, okay, well, I'll test my body of knowledge against a known association or something that is more recognised? What's your link to the certifications? And obviously we're all a bit conflicted with being ISACA members, but that do certifications. But yeah, where do you sit in all of that?
Sure. So I look at certifications through a couple of different lenses. One is what John had mentioned in terms of, this is a demonstration of the body of knowledge that I've acquired. So there's that part, but it's also a marketing and branding exercise. And so really understanding the industry that you want to target, ultimately the job that you want to target. So as an example, if I want to know that I want to be a chief information security officer one day, and these are the industries that I want to follow, then ultimately you want to get the certifications that help lend itself towards actualizing that path. If I know that I'm going to be in forensics, and I know that I'm going to testify in court, and that I want to run a big forensics lab, then I need to land the forensic certifications that enable me to be able to be competent in terms of testifying in court and run a big lab. And so, to me, it's all about knowing yourself and to some extent the journey that you want to take, and then identifying the certifications that are required to, meet that vision. Because if I want to work in U.S. government, there's certain certifications I'm going to have to get. So I know that there's a lot, and it can be like kid in a candy shop sometimes, looking at all of the opportunities and so forth. But I think because, and Johnny mentioned this as well, that it's an investment of time. And time is one of the most precious resources that we have because we can't recreate it. So if you're going to invest your time in doing that, instead of investing the time in, say, for instance, another area, then make sure that it's a certification that helps you actualize that goal.
Yeah, I think you need to know where you're going. You're getting the afternoon sun in there, Jenai.
You see me kind of like
I can see you leaning with the sun.
It's burning.
That's okay. You can change your view if you want, or you put a pair of sunglasses on. I get the same thing here on our afternoon sessions, so no problems at all if you need to change your camera. But I am just going to finish it off. You've got 5 minutes of sun movement to go.
Bearing with me, I'm so sorry.
So let's keep the audience wanting a little bit more for them to actually go and download the report. And unfortunately, and the PR team for ISACA know it's a bit of a bugbear of mine. I'd prefer to be able to have these reports on our marketplace, but unfortunately got to go straight to ISACA and download it direct, and it's only personal copies available. But keeping them wanting some more, maybe let's finish up on the conclusion. Business as usual is not working. John, the conclusions out of the report, and maybe what's got planned for this year's survey is to avoid much of the same. But yeah, what are some of the key takeaways from the report in its conclusions?
I think that the big takeaway is business as usual is dead, right? It's no longer applicable. We've seen that 2020 was largely the year of reinventing everything, right? With the global pandemic, businesses had to change everything. I think everything is back on the table. So every aspect, from how we train, how we recruit, how we hire, how we retain talent, everything should be back on the table. I also, when we talk about a seller's market, like, what concerns me is when we see that budgets are leveling out, and granted, the budgets, when they get asked the question, what we don't know is what are the components of it? Is the training part of that? Because in some places it is. Some places it's a dedicated budget. But who's paying for the headcount as well? At some point, like, the industry at large cannot sustain the salaries as they continue to go up. It truly, like, something has to give there, or it's going to be this big push towards emerging technologies, which Jenai has touched on before. But then all that does is kind of rearrange. It's a shell game of talent. We move them from one area and we're moving them to another. And how long does it take us to upskill them or reskill to fulfill that other area?
Well, maybe on that, Jenai, your thoughts on, and I did an interview with, I'll give them a plug, Sentinel-1 yesterday. They pushed themselves forward as an autonomous AI endpoint protection platform. So there's the more ML and AI, and we talked about the cloud computing. Is there any real core trends that you see as a takeaway from the audience listening that might be, one, either interested in cybersecurity or trying to sort of deal with their own skill gap? How much into the data science and the sort of the AI ML type spaces will we need to be, or do you foresee?
Oh, no. AI is okay. So there's two. One is cloud. Cloud is foundational. Cloud can no longer be considered an emergent technology. One of the downsides to a lot of the training programs out there is that they are so heavily focused on laptops, workstations, and physical servers, and do not get into or involved in understanding the security issues that come with cloud. And when I say security issues, I don't mean just protection. I also mean defense. So hands down, people need to become more competent in cloud. But the other one is AI. And so AI, again, is moving past this emergent. We're already in the fourth wave of artificial intelligence. So you've got that. But, the problem is that it is embedded into too many systems. It is making, critical decisions on behalf of your environment. There are very few people in our industry that understand how to design security into a thinking system. There are fewer people who know how to defend an attack against a thinking system. And very important, we don't have a lot of GRC people who understand how to audit it. For our social justice warriors that are out there, there's this really interesting intersection between GRC security and artificial intelligence, because, fairness and transparency and accountability and, all line up into many of the things that an auditor would look at when analyzing the effectiveness of an algorithm. And so bias starts to come into play. And that's something that auditors would pick up. So if you're somebody who's really interested in looking at thinking systems that may have really big societal impact, that's an auditor that's going to pick that up. Yeah. At this point, it needs to be foundational to every cybersecurity person's, job curriculum. And I would say in the schools as well. So in our apprenticeship program, we had a month where we had, his name is Dr. Celestin Ntengwa, and he PhD in physics, and he came and he taught our students for a month in the fundamentals of auditing AI. Right. So I would say that's a big one.
So yeah, there's quite a lot there to unpack. I think from a cloud perspective, it's very business orientated, so it's more traditional cybersecurity. But then when you're talking about auditing AI, I think we've seen there's a bit of a change in cybersecurity as well, where you're now talking about data privacy and online, the operational technology, the safety aspect, the IT/OT crossover as well. It's kind of what we're going to be covering off next week with our security consultant series. I really want to get a sense of the physical and the cyber people and how they are talking to each other, because that's changing as well. The physical people are coming across. The electronic people are now dealing with cloud networks and edge devices. Rather than sort of standalone sort of closed circuit television on an analog system. That's all now edge devices on a network. So they are coming into the cybersecurity field. So it becomes increasingly competitive as well. And then you've got the vendor side all trying to sell a product that will be kind of on the bandwagon of this we can do it faster, we can make autonomous decisions for you, and you need less people. So it's a really interesting time. It's going to be, I keep saying it, it's a very interesting decade. The world has changed thanks to COVID-19, and it's a permanent change to a hybrid workforce. So not only does it become more important, cybersecurity, but then we have these type of issues that have been with us for a little bit of time in terms of the skill sets, the constant change, and the constant need to attract new people into the industry and competing against other industries too. I talked about privacy, data science. We've got to get them in across and as champions for cybersecurity, because I'm sure they can do a lot of the role along the way. So maybe let's just finish off with some closing comments from you both, and maybe what you hope for 2021, 2022 in terms of how this report will contribute to the sector. Jenai, maybe start with you and then we'll finish off with John.
Sure. So first off, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about the report. The report, was definitely, one of the triggers, that helped us to even think about building out the program. What I hope that comes across is that people start, both in terms of employers as well as the education system, start thinking very differently about how you get 3.5 million people trained and upskilled, into the world of cybersecurity. That small and medium-sized businesses also play a part here, because they can give opportunities to junior people, whereas bigger companies may not. I think for me, that's the big, push, as well as diversity. I know that there wasn't a big push in terms of diversity with this report, but it does illustrate that, with this gap that we have, this employment gap, we also have this historic opportunity to increase our numbers across the board when it comes to improving diversity in the industry.
Very good. And John, closing comments, and are you going to do a third year next year?
Oh yeah, I'm in it for the long haul, Chris. So I'll just touch on what Jenai said. So ISACA we made a concerted effort to pull the the diversity piece out of this report because ISACA actually stood up a One in Tech foundation, and that is their charter is they're looking specifically at that. So for 2021, I'm hoping that the data that we get at the end of this year, that be for next year's report, that we're going to see a decrease in time to staff, right? From the time that the open rec to get somebody in the job, and that understaffing actually changes. I also then just the plug is that we just need greater involvement across the board, and we have to think a little broader. I think, especially with rural parts, they are part of the minority that's out there, and it really is they're a disadvantaged population. And I know there's a lot of people who are banking big on 5G. I'm a skeptic in that regard. There's some pushback from those communities to even get the technology in there. So we have to do better at all levels. Every industry is being affected by technology. And there's no better person than Jenai who sees this day in and day out. So it's not just about our industry anymore. It's about, the better we do with tomorrow's generation of leaders in raising their sea of digital literacy, the better off we all are.
Yeah. Well, look, we're seeing signs of it here in Australia in terms of the curriculum starting to change. But again, I think it still happens in pockets. It doesn't happen as broadly and as structurally as we need it to be. And that's in a federated system, much like the United States. So I'm sure you're seeing the same thing. And you're both East Coast and West Coast and here in Sydney. So we've given it a bit of an international flavour. And so no doubt everyone else is seeing very similar things. So look, on that note, we've gone just up to 50 minutes. So pretty much almost on the hour. We've seen the Californian sun come into play, so thank you so much. And on that note, we've been talking about the ISACA annual research report, State of Cybersecurity, with Jenai Marinkovic and John Brandt there in the US. So thank you so much for your time. This will go out as a Cybersecurity Weekly podcast, but I do appreciate you coming on our Tech and Sec Weekly.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Good on you. I'll put you backstage and I'll just finish off. Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you. Ciao. Okay, very interesting. And just to finish off, as I do, our report of the day. Obviously, we've been talking about the ISACA report, but the sustainable IT. This is from Capgemini, and this is on the marketplace as well. This is looking at sustainable IT. And interesting, we just kind of touched on it a little bit, applying an environment-focused approach across the enterprise IT landscape and looking at both the hardware and devices, network and communication systems, applications, and cloud computing, and the impact on the environment. It was interesting, I think Elon Musk took Tesla off Bitcoin because of the environmental impact. So we're talking about green IT and sustainable IT. So worth having a look at from Capgemini. And again, that's available on the MySecurity Marketplace. Just as a highlight for next week, the Security Consultant Series, Insight Series, starts on Tuesday. That's at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's going to be every Tuesday for the first 4 Tuesdays of June. And like I said, we've got about a dozen consultants there. You can go to the MySecurity Marketplace and register. And that's a closed webinar session week to week. And then I'll be back on Tuesday with a couple of interviews, but the first one will be with Jason Walker, the Chief Executive Officer with IntelliCare, and their $100,000 machine learning grant with the Macquarie University and Sydney University of Sydney. So looking forward to that. That's enough from us here at the Marketplace. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be back on Tuesday with our Tech and Sec Weekly. Thank you.